Welcome, geniuses. I'm Genie, your best buddy for A-levels. In this channel, we'll bring you to explore the secret formula behind success.
For this video, I'm covering AS topic 9, gaseous exchange and smoking, and I'm going to relate to a bit of practical skill, helping you to identify and describe the gross structure of human gaseous exchange system, and you'll be able to identify the structure of the wall on the trachea, bronchi, bronchiole, and alveoli. So what does it mean by gross structure of gaseous exchange system? Gross structure basically means macro structure that is visible using naked eyes. So imagine if you dissect a person's chest, what can you see that is part of gaseous exchange system? Number one, you see trachea, which will actually branch out into the left and right bronchus. And from the bronchus, they will branch out into more bronchioles, which is located within the lung, and at the end of each bronchiole you will see alveoli, which looks like a air sac if you actually cut the cross section of it. And some structure that is visible will be the C-shaped cartilage. If you are given a photomicrograph, how can you distinguish between a trachea and a bronchus and a bronchiole? So we know that for a trachea, the innermost lining that's facing the lumen will be ciliated epithelium. How can you tell? Later I'll show you a enlarged diagram or the zoom in diagram of the inner lining. And the most importantly is, can you see this C-shaped structure? This will be the cartilage, and from the shape of it, you can tell that it's actually C-shaped, and sometimes they call this the incomplete ring of cartilage. So what is in between the cartilage and the ciliated epithelium? Between this two, the layer, you can find mucus gland and sometimes some smooth muscle. How about the tissue surrounding the whole trachea? So all this tissue responsible to hold the different layers of tissue together will be known as connective tissues. And the middle part sometimes is known as the lumen or the airway. So this is how you identify a trachea. So it's important to be able to identify the cells within the inner lining, as this will allow you to distinguish between the artery, vein, and the respiratory tract, such as the trachea and bronchus. So when you zoom in, if you see columnar cells, means cells that are elongated with cilia, you know this is definitely part of the gaseous exchange system, as we know that the cilia is responsible to sweep the mucus, and in between this ciliated lining you will be able to find goblet cells that usually found intermittently in between the ciliated epithelial cells. Below the ciliated epithelium layer, you can see smooth muscle And a smooth muscle cell usually looks flattened, or sometimes you call it spindle-like. And the layer below, it looks like the cells have some lumen, which is some glandular structure known as mucus gland. So take note, we have two different types of structure that is responsible in producing mucus. One will be the goblet cell and the other one will be the mucus gland. And the layer below here, this will be the cartilage. So how can you tell if this is a cartilage? You will be able to see cells that are surrounded by a transparent liquid. So this purple color one will be the cell, and each cell is surrounded by a transparent liquid. So they actually have a name for it. The cell or cartilage cell will be known as chondrocyte, and the transparent liquid surrounding it will be known as lacuna. This will be the distinct feature of a chondrocyte, which is found within the cartilage. Therefore, once you identify the cartilage, the ciliated epithelium lining, you will be very, very sure that you know that you're looking at a trachea. How can you distinguish between the trachea and the bronchus? Both of them have the exact same layers of tissue, except that in a bronchus, the cartilage does not exist as a C shape, but instead, they are known as cartilage plates. Other than that, all the other tissues are the same, whereby the inner lining will be the ciliated epithelium. The layer below here that you can see many small circles will be the mucus gland, and the external layer will be the connective tissue. So how can you identify a bronchiole? So a bronchiole doesn't have a cartilage, therefore the inner lining is actually folded, and the ciliated epithelium lining is without goblet cells, and cilia is still present, as in case there's any mucus that fell into the bronchiole, they are still able to sweep the mucus away from the lung. And since it's highly folded, it's always ready to stretch and recoil during inhalation and exhalation. And you can see that around this layer that is pink in color is actually the smooth muscle layer that contracts and relaxes to regulate the airway to control the flow of air. And the external layer is most likely the connective tissues to hold the structures. And in a photomicrograph of a bronchiole, you can start to see more of the alveoli surrounding it because it's already within the lung. So all these air sacs that varies in shapes and sizes will be the alveoli. Finally, what are the detailed structures that you can find within the alveoli wall? So we know that the alveoli is actually an air sac that is made up of a very thin wall known as squamous epithelial. So squamous cells actually means that the cells are very flat. Therefore, you will most likely see the nucleus that's the only thing that's protruding with a very, very thin cytoplasm. And if you see any cells with a large nucleus like this, it's most likely the macrophage that is patrolling around the alveolar wall, trying to engulf and digest any pathogen. If you see there's actually a structure with a group of red blood cells, this is most likely the capillary, and most likely a slightly larger one that you can carry many red blood cells. But sometimes you can only see one red blood cell trying to squeeze through the capillary found around the alveolus. So now we're going to have a table to summarize all the structures that are visible. So for trachea and bronchus, you realize that all the structures that are present are the same, except that the cartilage for trachea is actually C-shaped, while for bronchus is actually plates. And in terms of bronchiole, usually in our syllabus, we'll focus more on terminal bronchiole, the one that I show you, where it's without cartilage, therefore the inner lining is folded. There's no goblet cells as we wouldn't want infection to reach the lung, but it has cilia to actually help to sweep the mucus away and smooth muscle to control the size of the airway. And finally, something that's important is we need to know the structure of alveoli, that we know is actually very thin wall with one cell thick squamous epithelium. Therefore, it's the site of gaseous exchange. There's one more structure that's important here to note will be elastic fiber. So elastic fiber is meant for the structures to stretch and recoil to regulate the airflow. Therefore, it's present in every single structures here. Okay, this is a past year question showing a photomicrograph of a bronchus wall. So what are the structures that you can identify? First thing, we always identify the lumen. So this is the lumen. How can you tell? As I can see this layer has some brush border showing that it's a ciliated epithelium. And this layer, I can see that there's many small circular structures that most likely look like some glands. So most likely is known as the mucus gland. This layer that's fibrous like tissue will be your smooth muscle. And this structure that you can see, there are many small circular structure that is surrounded by some shadow-like liquid. This is known as the cartilage. So what is the function of the tissue labeled X? X, we know that it's a cartilage, so therefore is to provide support. And what about A? Contracts. Structures that contracts will be definitely a muscle. So this is meant for smooth muscle. B helps to widen the airway when at high altitudes. Most likely is the role of elastic fiber and the smooth muscle. Produce mucus to trap dust particle will be the role of goblet cell, which is actually found within the ciliated epithelium. So the answer for this question will be, obviously, donkey. For this question, it's given a photomicrograph of a lung. So we need to be smart enough to identify the structures that's easiest to identify, which is most likely number 2. So what is actually number 2? You can see that it has a large air sac and the wall is very thin. So we know that 2 is definitely the alveolus. Then between 1 and 3, Okay, number 3. There's no significant airway, and you can see many small circular structures within this particular structure. It's most likely showing a vessel, and most likely is a small artery since it can carry a large volume of red blood cell. And then for number 1, I can't really see any significant cartilage here, and the wall is relatively thin compared to a trachea, so it's most likely a bronchiole. So for this question, the answer will be C. For more understanding of this chapter, you're welcome to join my group or private lesson. Thank you.
That's all for today's video. If you're interested in more genuine sharing by other geniuses, please subscribe to our channel and don't forget to turn on the notification bell, ding dong. Also, if you're struggling with 1 or 2 past year questions and the mark scheme just doesn't seem to help, Genie has got you covered. Feel free to let us know what question it is by filling in the Google form linked in the description below. GenieUs Hub will get genius teachers to fulfill your request for the solution. Genie will see you next time. Bye-bye.